In today's video, we have a lot of information to cover, including the Habs coming to terms with Alexander Romanov. We also have an update on the Brendan Leipsic situation, the Maple Leafs are losing an assistant coach, and we have some trade rumors focusing on the Kings and Lightning. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety and a lot of news to cover today. It's going to be an action-packed video, one you're going to want to watch all the way through because I have a lot to cover. So let's dive right in and get started with one of the bigger news items of the day. The Montreal Canadiens announced this morning that they have come to terms with Russian defenseman Alexander Romanov on the framework for his entry-level contract. Now, I guess the key term here is that they've come to terms. That doesn't mean that he's signed because he has not officially signed, and this contract is not officially filed with the NHL. It is contingent upon waiting to find out details as to if he would be able to play during the 2019-2020 season, if and when the NHL can resume that season. So, of course, like I mentioned before in prior videos, if Romanov is able to play during the 1920 season, if and when it gets restarted, then they want to be able to let him play, and he wants to be able to play. So that's why this is not officially signed, sealed, and delivered. But the important part is that they've come to terms, and he's definitely 100% going to be in Montreal as soon as he is able to, whether it be part of the resumed season or when next season gets underway. Now, there was some comments from his agent, Dan Milstein, including that he's basically saying this is a one-way ticket to Montreal and he intends to stay there for a long time. But keep in mind, the framework of this contract will include the standard European clause. So I'm not sure exactly what the date will be, but there will be a date included that if he is not playing in the NHL by that time, that he will have the right to be assigned to a European team and play over there for the remainder of that current season. So obviously, in Romanov's case, he himself has made comments saying he wants to come to North America and he's prepared to play in the NHL or the AHL. I think the Habs will give him every opportunity to play in the NHL. I think he's likely ready for that. He had a tremendous year last year in the KHL, and I think he's certainly ready for the big time here. But it's not unusual for some prospects to need a little bit of seasoning time in the American Hockey League, although he likely won't be able to get that during the 1920 season. It is debatable if they'd be able to resume their season. I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that the AHL will have to cancel the remainder of their 1920 season. But Montreal, amongst other teams, are kind of waiting on a few contracts here before they're officially filed because they want to get clarity and find out if the team is able to have them in the lineup if and when the season resumes. So now the other part of this too with Romanov, there was a lot of talk and speculation that one of his friends from his old team in the KHL, Alexei Marchenko, another experienced, more mature Russian defenseman, might be coming along with him. A lot of talk over the last 2-3 months, or maybe a little longer, that when he finally signs for Montreal, that he might bring a friend with him. Well, we did get confirmation, and I may have mentioned this in a prior video in the last few days, but Marchenko did officially sign to stay in the KHL. He did change teams with the Locomotive and signed a 2-year contract. So he definitely won't be coming to Montreal with Romanov, but you never know. Wouldn't completely rule out the possibility in a couple of years' time once Romanov's more established. You just never know. But I guess the good news and the most important news for Habs fans is that Romanov has come to terms and will be signing officially once we know the exact situation with the 1920 season and how that's going to play out. Now, the NHL also made some other announcements today, including the fact that they're postponing or basically canceling, at least for this year, for 2020, the NHL Global Series. Obviously, with everything going on around the world, it's not prudent to suspect that they'd be able to travel and have these games. There's really no timetable of when the NHL season is going to return, when next season is going to be able to start and all that. So they just had to postpone everything and push it back a year. So obviously, this included a couple of games, one in Helsinki as well as in Prague. I believe it was Columbus in Colorado, supposed to be playing in Finland in front of the Helsinki crowd. And then the Bruins and Predators were playing in Prague, Czech Republic. So unfortunately, those games will be bumped a full year, but it's certainly understandable. It wasn't fair to think that those would actually be able to continue. Now, the other big news today as well came from the form of the Washington Capitals and their forward Brendan Leipsic. Of course, yesterday we discussed the situation involving the Capitals forward in the conversations that were basically leaked or hacked or whatever you want to call it, because we don't know the true full 100% story on how it all came to be. But he was in a group chat on Instagram with some other hockey players and friends and made a lot of disparaging remarks towards many people, including teammates, former teammates' wives, other players around the league, including Connor Connor McDavid. There was something about him in there and his girlfriend as well. Several other females as well. So there's all kinds of stuff in there that were really not great, and he's gotten himself in some hot water. And like I mentioned yesterday, his brother, who was playing university hockey for the University of Manitoba, was going into his third year. He has been kicked off of that team, and now the Capitals have announced today that Leipzig himself has been placed on unconditional waivers for the purpose of contract termination. So he essentially is done. As I mentioned yesterday as well, I couldn't imagine him going back into that Capitals locker room after everything that was said. I mean, he did refer to a couple of his line mates as being losers as one of the more comments that stuck out there. So, you know, considering some of the strong personalities and leadership in that room, I just could not imagine a situation where he walked in there and faced guys like Ovechkin and Tom Wilson and Backstrom and John Carlson and the rest and had to, you know, own up to what he had to say. That would have been pretty awkward, and it's just easier to not bring him back. He was in the final year of his deal. He's played for 5 teams over 5 years. There's clearly something there, and which is mostly related, I would think, to his hockey talents. I mean, he did come through as a pretty decent prospect in his younger days. Never really fully realized to be a full-time regular NHL player with any kind of, you know, sustained success at least. But, you know, could Leipzig continue his hockey career? Maybe, but if so, he's not going to be able to do it in the NHL. He's going to have to go overseas, either to a European league, KHL. I'm not sure where he's going to go, but I just don't see a way for him to return after what he's had to say. And even regardless if you can say it was private or what, it doesn't matter. The fact is it became public, and all these players know a lot of what he had to say, and he's not going to be, you know, very well liked because of that, and he's going to have some issues there. But lesson to be learned here is I would recommend to anybody out there, especially, you know, and anybody who likes to be a part of group chats, or if you're texting or messaging with anybody or any group, I would never say anything that you would really be that hurt or upset about if it became public, because unfortunately sometimes you get people in those group chats or other people that you're talking to that might decide to leak information against you, and at the same time you know, hackers can get in there and try to ruin you as well. And like I said, in today's cancel culture, all it takes is to piss off or upset the wrong person, and these things can happen. And sometimes, you know, you got to be careful what you say. Doesn't matter if it was private or not. You just, you know, technology nowadays, you just can't take that risk. So hopefully this is a lesson to be learned by many other professional athletes and just people in general. You need to be better. These comments are not something we can condone. Now, moving on to some other news here, the Toronto Maple Leafs will be losing one of their assistant coaches, as assistant coach Paul McFarland will be moving on back to the Ontario Hockey League to become the head coach of the Kingston Frontenacs of the OHL. Of course, McFarland previously head coached the Kingston team in the past year and had a lot of success during his time there. Then had the opportunity to go to the NHL with the Leafs as an assistant coach for the past few years. So obviously there's going to be an opening on Sheldon Keefe's staff with the Maple Leafs, but in McFarland's case, going back to coach the Kingston Frontenacs is a good opportunity. Obviously, if he has ambitions to become an NHL head coach, it's not going to be a bad experience for him to kind of further what he already had there. Plus, it's an opportunity for him to coach one of the, you know, potential up-and-coming big superstars in Shane Wright, who's one of the exceptional players granted status to enter the OHL a year early, who played this year for Kingston. So they certainly have ambitions there to build a winning team around him, and we'll see you know, what kind of star he can become. He is expected to be one of the top, if not the top pick in the 2022 NHL draft. So should be interesting to see how McFarland and company and Wright and how they can build around him in the next couple of years, and also be interesting to see how the Maple Leafs go about filling the void on their coaching staff. I know there's all kinds of great candidates out there who could be looked at, so I guess we'll see once we have further news on who that new person might be, but they certainly have no need to rush there. But we'll see in the coming days and weeks as they discuss and make an announcement possibly on that front. Now, as I mentioned, we also have a few trade rumors to discuss about the offseason for some of these teams, including the Los Angeles Kings. There had been some talk possibly about Jeff Carter may end up on long-term injury reserve, you know, for a longer term. Maybe he may not be back at all. There's an article from NBC Sports indicating that Carter will likely end up not playing this summer if the NHL season can resume. He apparently has a core muscle injury and will require to be on long-term injury reserve for an extended period of time. So they will be without him if they do come back to play games. Of course, there is a possibility that the NHL may scrap the regular season and only play playoffs, and depending on what format they go with, a team like the Kings may not be involved anyway. But this article goes on to reference the possibility they wonder, with 2 years remaining on his contract and lots of talk in the past at least about potential retirement, if Carter would indeed return. I know the Kings are in a situation where they likely wouldn't mind moving some veteran guys, and Carter is a name that's been brought up. He doesn't have any trade protection on his contract, but there was talk previously that if he were traded, that he may not report and just might opt to retire, which would be bad news for the team acquiring him. He's got 2 years left, just a little bit over $5 million on his contract. So the money itself isn't terrible, but of course Carter's a little bit older, doesn't produce like he used to, and now with this injury, that could be a big blow for how he performs for the remainder of his career if he does indeed come back. So it'll be interesting to see how the Kings go about handling this. I know there's been a lot of talk, obviously, that they would like to move out some of their veteran contracts, but the problem is that some of them are just so long and so much money that it's going to prove difficult to do. They seem to be comfortable hanging on to guys like Kopitar and Doughty, who have long-term big money deals to be the veterans that lead through this rebuild. But some other players like Carter, like Dustin Brown, for example, might prove to be very, very difficult to move on from, and they might be stuck with these guys. But if Carter ends up a long-term injury reserve, at least they can get cap relief from that if need be. But be interesting to see how the Kings go about addressing their veterans here in the offseason, and whether or not Jeff Carter can ever make a return, or what this might mean for him down the road. Now, as I mentioned as well, there's another article referencing the Tampa Bay Lightning and their potential cap crunch from The Athletic here, and Joe Smith is the author. Joe Smith is mentioning here the fact that they have some guys that are RFAs that could be prime offer sheet targets, like Mikhail Sergachev on defense and Anthony Cirelli up front. And he references the fact that some guys like Alex Killorn, Tyler Johnson, or Yanni Gourde would be the most likely players to be moved to make the space necessary to get those contracts in place and to create the salary cap room that they need. Of course, Killorn certainly had another solid year for the Lightning, who's had a pretty solid, stable career. He's a pretty consistent player. His contract now is going to have a form of a modified no-trade clause, so that trading him would be a little easier, whereas Johnson and Gourde have a full no-move clause, which they'd have to waive. And of course, there's also the possibility the NHL might grant some compliance buyouts, and if they do that, they might go a different direction here. I think personally they probably would prefer to move Johnson over Killorn, but I think Killorn is going to be the easier player to move because of the no trade on Johnson's contract, whereas Killorn only has a modified no trade. But the Lightning are certainly going to be a team that have some tough decisions to make, and I know there's going to be a lot of teams out there who probably would have some interest in some of their players that they might be willing to acquire, but at the same time, other NHL teams are going to know that they're in tough and they're going to not want to help them out too easily. And the other problem with this as well is that a lot of other NHL teams are going to be in similar boats, and there's really only a handful of teams, in my opinion, who can really take on contracts that have more flexibility to be able to do this. So it's going to be tough, and the NHL might have to go the route of compliance buyouts, but with a limited market on some of these players, they may not get the return that they originally had hoped for. The likelihood of the salary cap staying flat, possibly going down with an expansion draft coming up not too far into the future as well. Some of these teams are going to have to make some rash moves, and even if the return is low, they might not have any choice but to take the deal. Like I said, but the other big wild card here is compliance buyouts possibly being offered by the NHL to help all NHL teams have a little bit more cap flexibility due to the shutdown and a likely flat salary cap we're going to see for a potential extended time. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed today down in the comments, and we can continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.